He's not ready. He's not ready.
No, I was so Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Swampscott School Committee meeting. Today is Thursday, March 9th, 2023. We are coming to you live from Swampscott High School. If you are able, please, let's stand and have a pledge of allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. I hope everyone is doing well on this lovely Thursday. Let's start with public comment, if there's any public comment. Our vast audience here looks quiet for the evening. I don't see anyone out there who would public comment. We do see Cheryl. Hi, Cheryl. So with that, we will move right along to committee announcements. Ms. Marshall, do you have any committee announcements?
Do not have any tonight.
Great, thank you. Ms. Wright.
I was excited to get the email from a band student asking
Me
for...
too. I have my little, I paid my little thing and have
I know.
that.
Yeah, so I'm excited. I got mine too. Well, I haven't physically gotten it, but yeah. That was great. I'm glad there was some follow-up.
Yes, I was really happy about that. That's good. Anything else?
I don't have anything.
Ms. O'Connor.
Thank you for reminding me that I got that email too and was thrilled. I said, by the way, make sure that you reach out to all the other school committee members too. He's like, already did.
Yeah.
So kudos to Mr. Roby. I don't have any,
Mr. Giannis, anything from you?
I was going to ask you guys to buy a calendar tonight too, but that person beat me to it, so.
I need to buy a calendar, so
There we go.
I need to buy one.
Is your student in band as well?
2 students in band.
Oh.
Wow.
Well, get the email to the superintendent.
I know.
My office absolutely would buy them.
There
so.
we go.
And it looks like a terrific opportunity for the kids.
Good.
So,
Please send the email my way because seriously, central office, I'll share it.
AJ, can't remember his last name. AJ somebody. Who was it who emailed us?
Oh,
With a K.
Klug.
Klug.
Flu, great.
Yeah.
Oh,
Alan
Kluge.
Klug.
Klug.
Yeah, Kluge.
yeah, other than that, I have nothing else.
Okay, great. Just to let everybody know what we're talking about, the band is selling calendars for a fundraiser. I'm sure you can't see that, but here it is. And like everything in the community, if you so are able and you'd like to support the various activities at the high school and other schools, please reach out to maybe the main office or wherever your student is and help the cause.
And is this one specific to the field trip that?
Yes.
Yes.
Money for
To
that
the New
New
York
York
City
Right,
trip
we
that we.
talked about last week, right?
Yes.
Which is
Awesome.
very jealous about. Sounds
No.
great.
How much is that? 20?
$20, yes. All right, and with that, I turn it over to the superintendent for your superintendent report.
Thank you. My committee announcement is, and speaking in the vein of the music department, I think you all got the invitation to Together in Harmony, a concert here this Sunday at Swampscott High School. Together in Harmony has been a collaboration between Salem, Marblehead, and Swampscott for the last 20 years. This is the 20th year that they put on a concert, and it rotates at each of the schools over the 3-year period. Every time it's here, I have the honor of emceeing it. It starts at 1 o'clock, and so just to highlight these talented singers at each of these 3 schools, my alma mater, Salem High, Marblehead High, and Swampscott High School. So it starts at 1 o'clock on Sunday afternoon in the auditorium here. It's called Together in Harmony, and I will be emceeing. So anyway, I look forward to that.
Excellent.
I also wanted to let the committee know that at the March 23rd meeting, Ms. Stella will be presenting an update on the FY23 budget. We've been so focused on the FY24 budget that we haven't done an update, and so she and I were discussing that we'd like to have a presentation for you on the 23rd to update the current year's budget. And then I want to talk a little bit about, just very briefly, about the FY24 budget. Since our last meeting, and then since last week's select board meeting on March 1st, I want the committee to know and the public to know that there have been numerous meetings and numerous conversations regarding the FY24 school department budget. However, there's still work to be done, so I don't want to get into specifics tonight. But I want to take the time tonight to personally thank Select Board Member Mary Ellen Fletcher for her questions, her time, and her commitment to fully understanding the school department's requests above and beyond the 2.6% increase directed by the town administrator. Ms. Fletcher's interest in moving the article for a special education stabilization fund forward at town meeting this spring has also been invaluable. I don't want people to think that Ms. Fletcher is not holding the school department accountable for fiscal responsibility, because she certainly is. We are the town's largest department, but I feel like in the last week, she's really taken the time to understand the complexities of our budget and the challenges we face with our young students. I am really looking forward to, and part of this begins tomorrow, we have a meeting scheduled. I'm looking forward to our continued collaboration and conversations with the town administrator, our finance teams, and then the finance committee as we continue to finalize the final number of the school department's budget request for FY24. I'm incredibly hopeful. I'm incredibly grateful that somebody took a lot of time to sit with us and understand what the adjusted number was we were asking for and why, and pull up that history and really understand it, and then talk about, you know, capital and what is appropriate in capital. And I know that Ms. Steller and I are really grateful that somebody took time to dig deep with us and understand it.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I am sure we all have comments. Karen?
Yes. I too am grateful to Mary Ellen, and I can't remember a time when a select board member did such a thing. It took such time to look into our requests and to try to provide assistance. So I am grateful. I do have a lot of reservations, and that is born out of experience and what we've all endured over, you know, several budget seasons. So, I mean, my ask would be that while we're working on these agreements, and we want to be collaborative and we want to work together, but I would ask that we get as much detail as possible on these agreements, as much in writing as we can, so that everybody understands what we're doing, because I know, and I think everybody knows, we've gone into similar agreements in the past, and there were great misunderstandings on how things would work out in the end, right? That includes things like stabilization funds, that includes things like holding money in reserve for special education and reimbursing later, and then it did not work out the way they said it would work out. So I think a way to avoid that is to get as much documented as possible, as much detail as possible, timelines, whatever we can get to help that not happen again. I'm not, at this point, comfortable with verbal agreements, handshakes. I'm just not. And this is too important to the district to leave things up to chance, and I really think, you know, that we need to get things really buttoned down so that nobody can misunderstand or say that that's not what was intended, et cetera, a year from now. So
I understand that. I do. I mean, I've been part of the experience here as well.
It doesn't seem like a big ask. In the professional world, that's what you do, right? You document, and everybody agrees, and that's not a big ask.
I just want to say that this feels different this time around, because there are things in writing and there is a paper trail, and it feels different. I don't think I'm Pollyanna when it comes to budgets. I have experienced the same thing you've experienced. I know how long we've tried to get a stabilization fund set up, but this feels different, and I just ask the committee to trust Ms. Steller and myself that we will do what you're asking.
I have no problem trusting you and Ms. Stella. None. And I know that what you say is the truth. right before town meeting last year when we were blindsided. And I personally felt like I was being gaslit because I couldn't even imagine that the conversations that we had had were not coming to fruition. And at the time, Suzanne, you were like, it's gotta be in writing. It has to be in writing, and it has to be official, not like a quick email, but like a terms of agreement. So I know, I do trust you, and I do trust Miss Stella.
Make no mistake, this doesn't solve the school department's problems. There will be reductions.
Yeah.
And there will be efficiencies. But to understand where our asks were coming from means the world to me. I will be devastated if this takes a turn for the worse, really, because the conversations and meetings that have occurred in the last week have been so positive. But I also hear what the committee's saying, because I have sat here with you, and I've been at town meeting with you, and the disappointment has been big. So I do hear that.
Will agreements like the ones that are being discussed come before the school committee for final agreement, since it is budget?
I would think so, because it's your recommended budget. It's no longer
Yeah.
my recommended budget. It would feel right that by the 23rd, we would be able to bring you something to look over based on your recommended budget that was voted on February 16th. It's not my budget anymore.
Okay.
I might
We'll
be,
need to revote that.
right,
Correct. That is correct.
right.
Suzanne?
I am really thrilled about the possibility of a stabilization fund. It's just like, it's been so long in coming. It just, that feels great. I feel like that's a security net that's really important as things just fluctuate so much in that area. I just lost my complete train of thought.
Can I jump in on that?
Yeah.
My concern, especially about the stabilization fund, look, there's no two ways about it. This is a good thing. We've been, advocating for this for years. My concern is that how it's being funded this year, with the idea that we know we're going into this year with a 14% bump up. And so a stabilization fund really should be for unforeseen circumstances. And it's like we're beginning it knowing that it's not unforeseen circumstances. It should be part of the operating budget. So I feel like however we skin the cat, terrific, but it still leaves us at a deficit next year when we've got these costs that went up 14% this year that aren't being funded.
Well, I think the details of the stabilization fund are going to be how it's funded every year. What is it that's going to go in there? What is the commitment from the general government side of things to build that up? What is the formula?
Yeah.
So, those are the details that still need to be worked out. You're right, for FY24, that's part of our operating cost, but is there a 5-year plan to
Yeah.
continue to fund that? And then how do we contribute to that, and what do we put into that? And those are the details that are still to be worked out. I see Cheryl nodding her head. Do you want to chime in, Cheryl?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I mean, I hear what you're saying with that, Ms. O'Connor. And I totally agree with Superintendent Angelakis. While we have a framework and a general understanding, there are still a lot of details. And thankfully, it's March. And we have until, in theory, May to really work all of that out. And as Superintendent Angelakis mentioned, there's a piece of this that the school department will be looking into to take on to help fund that fund. And then we need to talk about what are some other pieces, right? And what's the minimum balance that we're going to keep into it? How are we going to keep funding it?
How do we access it?
Right. How do we access it? We have a general idea of how you do it, but there are semantics around that process that still need to be decided. So, while we're having a conversation tomorrow with the town administrator and the director of finance on the town side, to kind of nail down overall the agreement, there'll be continued conversations around this as we move forward.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I think it dovetails with what Cheryl was just saying. I think keeping us apprised of the progress, so, I guess my concern just from what I saw last year is the running the clock out. And getting stuck right at the end. And, keeping us appraised, so, if we need to do something or if we need to change tactics at all, we're able to do that. And again, I'm just going to throw this thought out, just in anticipation of your meeting tomorrow. Again, I don't know if anything can be done. I'm just throwing it out there because I read about it the other day, about that new planned veteran center, where they're going to use the ARPA funds, and presumably we have $4 million left in that, and around 2 is going to get used for this veterans thing. I have no idea what's happening to the other 2, but I do know that in general, those funds can be used for educational purposes. And I know we don't like, one-offs that aren't built in for continuity or sustainability, but, if it's there and it's available, again, I'm throwing it out there as just another piece of information for you to have.
I appreciate that, because I think the discussions are going to be, how does the general government set us up for success, but then how do we as a school department continue to fund this as well? What is our part in this? What is our role in this? And so, when you talk about in writing, when we started exploring this with the town administrator 6 years ago, we were looking at other districts' plans that are very detailed and outlined, almost like a contract, that talk about all of these details, and I would expect that we'd have that. And I appreciate that feeling of last minute, Mr. Giantis, that you're talking about, but I feel like, wow, we're like early-ish mark, and I feel like we're ahead of schedule right now, and I think both Ms. Steller and I are very conscious of not letting things drop.
Again, I have no doubt that you won't let things drop. I am worried that the rug will be pulled out.
I understand.
Suzanne, anything else?
I was just gonna, the other thing I was thinking is, I think it's really important for people to understand that part of our deficit came from COVID and using COVID funds to help with COVID-related things, and then having these savings, from transportation and materials and substitutes and crossing guards, like having these savings that we used the money. It just like we just sort of dug ourselves a little bit of a hole, and while we did great during COVID because of these savings and because of this extra money, we dug a hole.
Yeah.
And,
I agree.
We didn't do extra stuff. We have kids that have incredible needs right now, and a lot of
COVID's not over for education.
Yeah.
Right, and we're still trying to deal with that without the COVID funds and the extra personnel and stuff. So it's just.
Well, I think the superintendent said it beautifully last week, when it was like we should have demanded it back at the time. We used those savings because we could, but it wound up setting the bar that much lower for what our budget was.
Right.
But speaking to that, we keep saying COVID's not over for education, and Mr. Pastor and I have talked about, and Ms. O'Connor and I have talked about some concrete examples. I've been pulling the data from middle school and high school on nurses' visits that are due to mental health. I've also been pulling the data from them about 911 calls and hospital runs for students with mental health versus also, families that are picking their kids up and not waiting for an ambulance. So I'm getting that data that I'd like to share. I've also pulled the data for the last 2 years with the help of our data specialist, 10 or more absences that kids have had. And I was in the 6,000s in an Excel sheet looking at like the spreadsheet she had created, so I need to get a better sense of how many kids that is. I went from the top with 10 absences. We had 34 absences. You can definitely correlate that data with mental health. So I'm trying to put that together, not just for this committee, but also for the finance committee, because as educators to say the pandemic is still, we're still seeing effects of it, you know, numbers speak. And so I'm putting that together, and I hope to have that ready for our FinCom meeting. You know, I just even, not just that data, but the types of incidences that are happening in schools. We've never had physical fights in Swampscott in all my years, and last year we had a lot of physicality because kids had been behind their computers so long at home that socialization, even for our older students, was odd. And so I am trying to put together, I guess my point is I'm trying to put together some concrete numbers as examples of the residual effects of the pandemic. So I will
And
have that for you.
Do we have educational ones too?
was
I
just
mean,
gonna say. Oh, yes.
we know anecdotally, we've got kids in the school, we know there's issues with math and maybe with history or like understanding certain concepts. So, and even though we don't have hard data, do we have information from teachers or departments that show, they can even speak to
I
that?
think Ms. Raymond does a great job talking about how the preschoolers coming in don't have like fine motor skills, they don't have the social ability to sit and play games with each other, their attention spans, like she does such a great job.
Yeah.
And if you think about that age group, right, and they're just gonna need to be taught sort of differently for a while.
And
at
what about the
least.
kids whose 8th grade was in their bedroom?
Well, it's what
And
Ms.
what are they
O'Connor's
getting
brought up
now?
about the whole Holocaust
Right.
and the experience your two children, very different experience your two children had. So there's a gap, and that's
Right.
just one unit. What are the other gaps?
Yeah, there
Right.
are many. And so, you know, and I think that it's on one hand easy to say, yeah, this is something that the whole country is going through, but I think it's so important for us to be able, as a small district, who can afford to do these kinds of things, really look at what it is and how we can, very specifically, how we can support what these kids have lost. Because this isn't, we're not just some random district who's struggling to put pennies together. So I appreciate you doing that.
My focus is the students in front of us in this district. I can't worry about the Commonwealth, and our job is to do what's best for our kids.
Yeah.
And so that's what our plan is. But I just, my point is, I'm trying to bring you data, bring the other boards and committees data, and I will include some data in terms of academics as well.
And I think to some degree, it will be heartening for parents to hear some of these things, because we know, at least from the phone calls that we've individually gotten, you know, we're hearing from parents about, you know, some really terrible stories and a lot of hangover from COVID. So to really sort of have that front and center, you know, it's not like business is not as usual still. And I think affirming that for everybody will be helpful.
Sure.
Just to go back to the financial, John, you have any other comments?
You did a little bit what I was thinking, but just to add on to it, I appreciate the data as well. You know, really, my point was pretty simple, which was we don't want to make things worse for our kids. And you know, this all of the budget debate, you know, that's kind of what's been, you know, front of mind for me, top of mind for me has been, you know, let's not do something that's going to make things worse. You know, let's, you know, stabilize and make things better, you know, if possible. I mean, I think that should be, I think that's our goal, for sure, the folks here. So, but, yeah, I appreciate that.
Thank you.
And I think we all feel like even just answering whatever the issues are for 24, there are other bigger issues that we need to talk about as a committee, as a town, and coming up with, you know, some of that money might help us get through this budget process, but we're just going to be back here again next year. having these same conversations if we don't get ahead of this.
And
And
that-
I want people to be thinking about that and working towards that. If we're gonna have a spirit of collaboration, then we need to be talking about those things with Finance Committee and with Select Board, because if we couldn't do 4.1 this year, what's gonna happen next year? Because that number's gonna be higher, right? It has to be, because we're not really getting any of that money in our budget. We're talking about stabilization funds and some capital. So next year, that 14% is still gonna exist. We're still gonna need computers, we're still gonna need technology, so the budget's not gonna be any smaller. It's gonna be just that much bigger.
But I think the key to that, and we've talked about it before, is not waiting till budget season to have the joint meetings.
Yeah.
Right.
They need to
Well, that's what
start,
I'm
and-
saying.
right, they
So
need to start in the fall.
this can't be like, let's just fix this budget and everybody just goes their separate ways. Like, it has to be a plan.
There have to be ongoing conversations between
Right.
the boards and committees.
Right.
Absolutely.
So I'm gonna, thank you all
Okay.
for your comments. So I'm gonna weigh in here a little bit, and thank you, Superintendent, Amy, thank you for keeping me company on my ride up to Vermont on Tuesday night.
By phone.
By phone. I do want to echo everyone's comments, but Karen, especially yours. And I spoke to Mary Ellen 2 different occasions Tuesday night, and echoed the sentiment that I think we all have is there's just zero trust. There's no other clean, nice way to say it. There's zero trust. We want this to work. We need this to work. But we have all heard the words before. Like you, Superintendent, I was pleased with the words that I heard from Mary Ellen. We did have, so the community knows, the school committee and the finance committee had a scheduled joint meeting this coming Monday that we were asked to postpone just to give the town side more time to wrap their hands around the stabilization fund. As a superintendent can attest, I was not of the mind to do that. However, after speaking with everybody, I decided to give it a shot, and we are going to meet 2 week, I think it's
The 20th.
the 20th with the finance committee, thinking that's enough time to get everything together. I am hopeful that at least for fiscal '24, this will be helpful. I completely agree, Karen, with you that this hole's only going to get bigger, and the hole has to be discussed. This is, in my eyes, and I know people disagree, to me this has nothing to do with a new school. It has nothing to do really with anything. There's a fundamental underfunding to education in this community. And there's a fundamental underfunding of our tax rate to this community. No one wants to pay more taxes, but I don't know about you, but the 351 odd cities and towns in Massachusetts, I think there's a premium for living in this community. And I think people from other communities would say identically the same thing. So I'm saying it. I believe there is a premium for living here. Is it right? Is it fair? I don't know. It just is, and it's a fact. And it's all well and good to say, well, we're going to keep yearly taxes artificially low for X, Y, and Z reasons, but that is coming home to roost, and it's really going to come home to roost in fiscal '25. And so I am hopeful that the work of the superintendent, of Cheryl, and of especially Mary Ellen will at least make this budget year palatable. But going forward, as we all have said, these discussions need to happen early, honestly, from everyone in the community. And some difficult choices have to be made of what we envision, and I don't mean we, but what the community envisions the Swampscott Public Schools to look like. And I think out there is this vision of what it is, and then there's this reality of what it is. And I know Superintendent, you and I have spoken about just some of the mental health challenges and the enormity of those mental health challenges. And Amy and I were having a conversation about, what year was it that we were talking?
1973, I just pulled up the quote.
73.
50 years ago,
50
Okay.
years ago.
And I don't want to take your fire, but if you extrapolate those dollars, we're underfunded by $5 or $6 million.
I think more than that.
Please.
So by 1973, accounting, I went there because I was actually looking, because I have a really exciting life, but because I was looking specifically at the fact that they recognized back in the early 70s that the Hadley had outlasted its use.
Wait, the early 70s, maybe way longer.
Well, but at town,
But
I
there
know
was a
that- but I
master
knew-
There's a
plan.
report from the.
But I
There
knew
was a
that at
master
town
plan.
meeting, there was a report, so I was trying to kind of dig into that. But what I did find was that in 1973, the budget was $5.8 million, which in today's dollars is $39 million.
$39 million.
So if, particularly I bristle when I talk to some old timers here in town who talk about how, like in the good old days, how, we used to be ranked much higher in the state. Well, our budget certainly hasn't kept pace.
Correct. And that's what I got from your numbers too. Because back then, we probably were way, way higher. And again, you extrapolate, call it $39, $40 million compared to 33 what we have.
Well,
That's substantial.
So the
That is a
interesting part
substantial
was,
amount.
percentage-wise,
Right.
it was lower for the whole town. It was closer, I believe, to 50%.
Yeah,
But being a higher percent the way we are now isn't necessarily, like, it's because they've made cuts, like, we've faced the cuts, but we know for sure, I mean, like, you look at Public Works, you know
Right.
that they've seen major cuts over
Right.
the years. There are lots of cuts all around. But our budget has grown in terms of percentage of the town, not because it has grown out of control, but because other parts of the town have been cut. So I do, I think it's important to recognize that.
Right.
We're really cognizant of the fact that Swampscott does support education.
right.
This is a town that spends more than they have to, and we appreciate that.
but it's still
But
not
it's
enough.
still not, it's
Right.
still not what we need to get the job done the
Right.
way that
Exactly.
the professionals.
Right. And just a couple other comments from me. It would be interesting to know where that other $2 million is going in ARPA funds. And then the question I have about the stabilization fund is, not knowing much about this is, and this will be something if you could ask tomorrow, and I'll ask during our joint meeting coming up, is how does the district access those funds? Because I just want to make sure from a privacy point of view, because this is one of the things we had talked about, if you remember, is we just want to make sure that when we access those funds, if we need to access those funds, it's done in a manner that privacy of the potential families impacted is tantamount to any of this. That's just a concern of mine.
Sure.
But I wish you luck tomorrow. I look forward to hearing all about it. I am like you, glass is half full. I am cautiously optimistic, and we'll see what happens.
It's better than being here tonight with having had no conversation.
Correct,
No,
absolutely
very
correct.
true.
So-
Absolutely correct.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Director of Finance.
We're on to chair. The news
Yeah.
could have come off. We're on to the
All right.
chair.
Director of Teaching and Learning.
Oh.
All right. So I just have a couple updates. Again, as I mentioned earlier, there was going to be a meeting with us and the Finance Committee. That's been put off for a couple weeks. Tri-chair, there's really nothing going on with that. Couple things I just want to ask of the Policy Subcommittee. A recent, actually it was yesterday or the day before, the Supreme Judicial Court declares public comment policy unconstitutional, and this was born out of, believe it or not, Southborough, Massachusetts. And without getting into this, what the Supreme Court is saying, at least to the reading that I have and the initial comments from our legal counsel is we need to take a look at how we handle public comment. Basically, at the end of the day, we can't say to be respectful and courteous. I don't know any other way to say it.
But we don't do that.
To be fair, we don't do that when we, so like, for example, when we went to the select board meeting the other night,
Right.
In their directive
Right.
for comment was like, we ask that you be polite, we ask that you know.
You
like-
don't discuss any employees, you don't mention anybody's name. I mean, they have a
No,
huge, long
but
disclaimer.
it was very much like, we ask that you be civil and kind
So you
and,
can't anymore.
but we don't do that.
But we don't do that.
So I don't know much about it. This is way out of my league here. But I will forward the documents that we were sent from our
Yeah,
legal
we got-
counsel.
Yeah, we got
Well,
it. Yeah, we all got
So
it.
if if the policy subcommittee could be in contact with Copeland and Page,
Do we even have a public comment policy?
Yeah, we do, and I pulled it up, and I have the MSAC one too, and theirs was updated in '22, and pretty much reflects how this trial was gonna go, because
Okay.
they sort of knew it.
right?
And, it just, I mean, we get to still delineate how much time
Right.
and that you can only talk about something on an agenda or something in our purview, like not personnel.
Right.
Like,
Right.
just something in our purview, right? And, but we do have a sentence that says, after a warning, you know, we reserve the right to ask you to terminate any speech that's, you know, constitutionally protected, like, or whatever. But, like, we ask people to terminate, you know,
Right.
stuff, and we sort of can't.
Right.
That's what struck me here about
Like
the
the
individual
threats are-
speaking time limits was when I read this.
Right.
You can
Right.
still, I
Yeah, you
mean,
can still-
We've always had that.
We've
and-
always had that, and that's
when
like, it really
Right.
is all about,
what they are saying.
It's about subjective.
Right.
We can't,
About the content, right?
we can't make any decisions about subjective content,
Right.
Right.
right?
Which makes
And-
sense.
Which makes sense, actually, I
It
mean,
totally makes sense.
you know,
Right. So if you guys on the policy subcommittee could just keep an eye on where
yeah,
this is
well,
from.
we put that on for the next meeting, right? We could just do
Sure.
like a first read of something.
Like a quick, if
Probably.
anything needs to be
Yep.
changed.
Thank you very much.
But as a practice, yeah, we've never stated that
You know
before
what,
public comment.
I would think that the MASC would have this, that we
They
could
do
just.
from
They
22.
do.
No, but I
said-
would think that they would have updated it based on this.
Well, they didn't do it yesterday.
Yeah,
Right.
it
But,
was
but they
literally-
did,
it was
but they
yesterday.
did update their policy in '22.
Yeah.
And I remember,
Knowing it was coming,
I
yeah.
remember part of the discussion on this update was what was coming down the pipe.
Yeah.
So they knew this ruling,
Was probably
no
gonna
matter
land
which
that
way it went, probably should have gone the way it did.
Yeah.
So their policy is,
And maybe they'll update it now that decision's out.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Right. And then the last thing I have is the superintendent and I are going to participate on a Zoom call early next week. I'll get this to you tomorrow. I was contacted by Rabbi Rogozhian of Temple Shura Hayam. There's a program called Cattle Car Holocaust Education Project that the organizers are bringing to Marblehead and Swampscott. And we're going to learn much more about that. For what I understand, that it will be funded by private citizens or corporations, so it won't cost the district anything. It sounds like a very interesting project. Again, this really is, I'm bringing the parties together. That's,
We're just
yeah,
listening at this
right.
point.
Yeah, and then I'm, that's really not us per se, I don't believe, but I know Marblehead is going to do it, and I'm gonna bring the superintendent in, and then I'll let you kind of dictate, goes from there. And that's what I have as far as the chair report. Subcommittee policy, meal charge policy.
you want to talk about it, John, or? I forgot to print it out.
So I can speak to it, and so I don't think we're doing a first read, are we?
Well, technically,
I think we have
Have to
to. I
do
did
first
notice
read,
that it
so-
wasn't,
Okay.
Did say them.
right.
I mean,
I'll add it.
technically we have to, even though this is our current policy with an additional sentence.
Right. We just added a sentence to it.
All right, so I can or?
Or just read
No,
the
I
new
don't,
sentence?
you don't actually have to read it.
No.
Like so you don't have to read it, but we should just talk about,
If you want to talk about the additional sentence, we could talk about that. So I think we had talked about this a little bit in a prior meeting about if any outstanding meal balances were left at the end of senior year, whether the students would actually receive that cap and gown if these weren't paid in full before graduation. So that's how it reads now. And I think there was some concern about leaving that language as is if there was an alternative or other options. So I think, that's something we've talked about. We were talking earlier today about that, if there were some options besides that, because, I'm only going to speak for myself, but it on its face, it looks a little punitive, but I understand the rationale here. I get it. So I think that's an area where we're going to have to, maybe come up with some options, bring them here for further discussion, and, maybe we can land in a place where we're more comfortable.
Well, I would just say that when we had Mr. Kohat come and present about, class dues, that generated a lot of conversation with Mr. Kohat and myself. And my takeaway from that was more about student activities and that not feeling right. What I asked the committee to consider is that Maureen Kellett, our Director of Food Services, doesn't work for the school district. She works for a vendor and an outside company. And whatever isn't paid is going to come out of our operating budget to pay it. So I look at this as a different responsibility. They will still get a meal, but in the end, if we have, I'm using an excessive amount, $1,000 in arrears for a family that we have tried to go after year, you're now taking that away from all of our students because it has to come out of the operating budget. I do agree that student activities is different because they can participate or not, and that's what Mr. Kohat and I are talking about. But I look at this as different. You can bring your lunch or you can purchase one. And we're going to provide you with a lunch, but you have to be charged and we have to pay that outside vendor, or we have to make up the difference. So I ask you to consider that.
Because these aren't kids necessarily who are,
On free and reduced lunch,
who are hungry.
right.
but they could be. Like we don't,
But they have free and reduced lunch.
well, but historically.
you're right.
People don't take
You know-
advantage of that program
You're right.
necessarily.
And
I mean,
you're
this
right.
is gonna be so much better when the government just votes to make
I know.
lunches free for
Ms.
everyone.
Stella, did you want to say something?
Yeah, you're right.
I agree with you. I will say that that language is fairly standard, right? So this isn't outside of what other districts do. Not saying that it's necessarily right for Swampscott, but it is fairly standard. To your point, this isn't for kids, free and reduced is free and reduced, right? So these are just charges that have been built up that we can't collect payment on.
So my issue with this line, and I agree, I've seen it in other policies, it says it has to be paid in full by senior year or you can't get your cap and gown. Does that mean you can't walk the stage? Does that mean you walk the stage without a cap and gown? Does that mean you buy your own cap and gown? Because I don't want to see
I
any
agree.
kid walking across the stage, without a cap and gown. And I don't want to see this not getting paid and someone walking across the stage with a cap and gown they borrowed from their sister or your brother, whatever. Do you know what
And
I'm
you
saying?
still did it in
Like,
the
I just
operating
think it
budget
has
still
to, we
takes
have to figure out this language or does it, go to collections, that was John was saying, or does it, I don't know,
Well,
So
also
that-
to your point,
I'm sorry, I was saying, so when I said punitive, that's the part that I was thinking, just going back to, our conversation with,
Right.
you don't want to embarrass someone on their graduation day if they don't have a cap and gown. I mean, that's really where my mind was, and to your point, I agree, since it involves food and not an activity, it does put it into a different bucket. So I agree on that too. So I'm sorry, Sam, but I just want to clarify.
yeah,
that.
no, I feel like, yeah.
to your point, it also says by their senior year. That means
Yeah, when?
September of senior year. So,
Or when? October?
Yeah.
What part of senior year?
I'm fine with you,
Let's just.
figuring out the language that works for the committee. I just,
No,
I
think we
know in
should
the
review.
past, it's like, we're $9,000 of outstanding debt. Oh, we're gonna take it out of the operating budget, and that's affecting every
Everybody.
student in our
Right.
district. So I ask you to consider that when you
Yeah, I
think about
think
language.
I think we should try to recoup it along the way.
I agree that,
Like,
why
I
are we
think we
waiting
should
till it's?
recoup it, in 8th grade, and then again, in a.
well, to Mr. Kohut's point, like as they're raising money for the class, and I think about that the annual dues, and then that you haven't paid, and then all of a sudden, senior year,
Right.
it's a fortune. So to do it at the end of each year is different, than having a $1,000 bill.
Cheryl?
Cheryl.
Oh, Cheryl, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I will say that we do try to recoup it every year, so it's not like something we just let build and build and build. It is something that is, every year, we try to recoup it. And not that I'm advertising this is what people need to do, but there is the availability for people to give a donation to wipe out unpaid balances. So there's also that option as well too, that I do know has been done in other districts by someone who wanted to do that for those students.
When we meet at the next, and you give us your financial update, could we get a sense of just what kind
I
of
was gonna
dollars
ask
we
that
are
question
talking
too,
about
actually.
Okay.
on average?
I think like it's a lot easier to collect in 8th grade though, and say you can't go to the moving on ceremony.
Yeah,
Like, it's really
I
different
completely
than
agree.
graduation,
Or-
right?
Right.
I know, but I'm
Yeah.
just saying, it's like, it's different,
Just
right?
remember, though, that sometimes these things are not even
kids.
just about that kid,
Right.
but about that kid's friends. Like when you graduate, you're there with your friends.
Yeah, no, I just.
And like, you don't want that kid and his or her friends to miss out because the parents are
But
delinquent with the food
presumably,
bill.
if you get them at a 4th grade or an 8th grade, the amount's gonna be smaller, right? If
Right.
it's not 12 years worth.
Yeah.
And if there is any other remedies, if there is a remedy where you can go to a PTF, it would be easier to do it earlier
Right.
when it's smaller dollars. Do you know what I'm saying? And catch it then, and maybe there are remedies, and they
Right.
can apply for something somewhere,
Yeah,
and
I mean, 'cause I think the bottom line is, you said it yourself, Superintendent, is that it comes out of the operating budget, and we're pretty tight. So we don't want to be overly punitive, and that's why I completely agree about the cap and gown thing. But I like the idea of catching it earlier, and, because again, you're right, smaller dollars, smaller ramifications nonetheless. And I think there's always remedies. The problem is that you don't have a remedy, and then 12 years later, you have this
Yeah.
nut on top of senior activities, on top of prom, on top of this and that.
right.
So, thank you guys for the hard work. Look forward to hearing
Yep.
more about it.
We don't have any revolving, like, food service isn't, there's nothing.
There is a food services revolving account, but I believe, and that goes to
That's all.
equipment, new equipment and things like that. Am I correct, Ms. Stella?
Yeah, and legally, legally, any unpaid balance, we have to move to, the operating budget. It's not allowed to be paid out of that revolving fund. It's a law due, I think, because of the federal funds we receive.
Like, I was just thinking, like, it's like so great to have a fundraiser, right? And put a couple $1,000s in the bank and just let it accrue and use it, because like having a fundraiser for food for other people or to have money, it seems like an idea people could get behind,
Yeah,
Right.
but
But, so maybe the PTAs could
help with that.
do that, you know what I mean, at each level,
Right,
and they could help as you went along.
right.
yeah, it's just hard. Like, you don't want to advertise that the PTA is going to pay your food.
Yeah.
bill.
No, exactly.
But,
No,
like, it's
exactly.
like such a
Well,
fine.
but this is also not unlike the conversation that we've had about sports,
Yeah.
and the fact that like a lot of sports really raise tons of money so that they can have all sorts of swag. I mean, if I have one more, big blue sweatshirt in my house, I'll just scream.
Wait times to buy 2 more kids.
And like, at the same time, we have, kids who can't afford to pay user fees. So, what can we do to ask the community to help?
Right. All right, well, thank you guys for work on that. All right.
Can I give a quick update on,
Of course you can.
on the unionization?
Yes, please.
We have another meeting that's happening tomorrow, Mr. Jantis and myself, and we have asked the tutor union to bring along their representative, as we're also going to have our legal team there. It was met understandably, I think, with a little bit of trepidation, hoping that it would be not a repeat of what happened between our representatives at the last time we were together at the teacher negotiations 2 years ago. I have assured them that that will not be the case, as there are no difficulties, no animosity here. But that we really wanted to make sure that because it is rare for a new group to unionize, that we wanted to do it, everything by the book, cross our Ts, dot our Is, so they say. So we are meeting tomorrow afternoon to talk about next steps.
Great, look forward to hearing about it. Okay. Anyone have anything else before we get into the consent agenda? Okay. The consent agenda, oops. Sorry. The consent agenda. The consent agenda is designed to expedite the handling of routine and miscellaneous business of the district. The school committee may adopt the entire consent agenda with one motion. At the request of any committee member, any item or items may be removed from the consent agenda and placed on the regular agenda for discussion. Tonight, I think we just have one item because there's no warrant. Just one item, and that's the regular session minutes of February 16th, 2023. Any discussion about the consent agenda? All right. Can someone make a motion to accept the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion.
Second, already?
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, the motion carries unanimously. Well, with that, I'd like to thank everybody out there for watching. Everyone in the crowd, please, if you could exit orderly. And can I have a motion to adjourn, please?
I'll make the motion.
Second, please.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, there is none. The motion carries. Good night, we are adjourned.
Good night, Cheryl.